for listening to So Much to Say here on TLV1. B'Tselem and Yesh Din are two big human rights organizations here in Israel, and they say they will stop providing the Israeli army with evidence of human rights violations in the Palestinian territories because the army is, quote, not serious about investigating them. B'Tselem has actually rejected a request made by the Army's legal department lately to provide them with evidence they collected during Operation Protective Edge this past summer in Gaza. And to talk to us about this groundbreaking decision, because B'Tselem has prided itself with cooperating very closely with with Israel's security establishment, we are now joined by the spokesperson for B'Tselem, Sarit Michaeli. Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, good afternoon. Just a quick correction.
Yeah.
This is specifically a B'Tselem decision, and it relates to events in Gaza, the recent hostilities in Gaza.
So it's not a change of policy, that's what you're saying?
Well, I mean, it's certainly a change of our policy in relation to the really vast amounts of resources, time and energy and effort we invested in trying to help and promote the criminal investigations that were opened following Operation Cast Lead. We, invested immense resources and really made a major effort to link the military police investigations with relevant witnesses in Gaza. We passed, a very large amount of information and evidence to the MAG Corps and to the authorities. And we decided recently that as long as the current investigation apparatus will stay the same and will not be adapted to the needs of these current of this reality, there is really no point in.
So I want to make sure that I understand it correctly. Based on the Army's, what you call the inaction of the Army about your allegations during Operation Cast Lead in 2008, 2009, almost 6 years ago, as long as there's no progress on that front, you're not going to cooperate further with the Army in regards to Operation Protective Edge, or in general? I don't quite understand how the two are connected.
Our point is that currently it's the current mechanism for the investigation of suspected wrongdoing by the Israeli security forces in these types of incidents, in the kind of situation of conflict that occurred in Gaza recently, is simply incapable of answering the relevant questions that are raised as a result of these hostilities.
Mm-hmm.
The current mechanism is basically, and I mean, I'm talking about the criminal investigations part of the mechanism. There is, of course, a parallel mechanism that's an internal military mechanism of operational investigations, but and in some cases disciplinary action, but it's not something that we're even part of or involved in.
So why have you cooperated with the Army so closely up until now?
Well, I mean, of course, the part, a crucial part of our work is promoting accountability for violations of the laws of armed conflict. Following Operation Cast Lead, we wrote, together with a large group of other Israeli human rights organizations, to the Attorney General and explained the type of mechanism we think should be in place in order to investigate the very serious allegations that
okay, and how is it different? How is your suggestion different to what the Army currently has? And very briefly, so that we can understand.
At the time and today, of course, our suggestions were rejected. We think there should be an independent mechanism of investigation, and an Israeli investigation that is independent of the Army, that isn't under the same chain of command of the same unit that made the decisions about the legality of actions during Operation Cast Lead. There are a few problems with the current apparatus. The first is that it really is only capable of investigating the smaller, the individual soldiers in the field. The investigations don't look at the responsibility, command responsibility, and they don't look at high-ranking officers. They don't look at, they're not structured to investigate the political and military officials that made the decisions, that made the policy. And there's an additional very problematic issue, which is the dual role of the MAG, the Military Advocate General. On the one hand, he is the legal counsel to the army. So he provides the army, the military, with legal decisions as to whether certain policies are legal or not. But at the same time, he's responsible for deciding on indicting those who violate the law.
But sorry, in democracies, these sort of judiciary oversight mechanisms exist in every type of agency. You expect, in a democracy where there's transparency and the rule of law, that systems would be able to scrutinize themselves.
Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, no, I don't, because, for example, when members of the border police are suspected of harming Palestinians, they're not investigated by the border police or, in fact, by the police. They're investigated by the Department for the Police Investigations in the Ministry of Justice. It's actually accepted that systems cannot investigate themselves. But don't even take my word for it. Listen to what the Turco Commission said. The Turco Commission actually discussed and raised many of the issues that...
Just to put it in context, it was a commission that was set up by the Israeli government after the so-called flotilla incident.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in their reports, they acknowledge that there is a problem. There are problems with the law, the system to investigate suspected violations of the laws of armed conflict by the Israeli security forces, and offered many recommendations, none of which were actually implemented. And in fact, the commission set up to consider their implementation hasn't even reported yet. But there's another issue, and actually which was also raised by the Turco Commission, which is that when many of the problems stem not from the operation of an individual soldier and not from the decision of any kind of interim or small-scale command echelons, but are the result of political, of policy decisions, there is no capability for the military police and for the MAG to investigate. The military police cannot investigate.
So basically what you're saying is that
it's no jurisdiction over it.
If the investigation mechanism is expropriated from the army and passed to another state agency, that will be okay.
We would gladly cooperate with a system that will be independent, that will seek to investigate suspected violations of the laws of armed conflict in our recent conflict in Gaza. I think it's important that this is an Israeli investigation, that it has to be independent, it has to be impartial.
Sure. The point is clear. Just one last question, Sarit. Does the same apply to alleged human rights violations in the West Bank, or is it only about this very intense armed conflict in Gaza? Well, we've been seeing, increasingly often lately.
Well, I think it's no secret that we have severe criticisms of the current investigative policy regarding the West Bank. But at the very least, there is, and we've, by the way, in our press release jointly with Yesh Din, we actually issued a very long list of recommendations and identified the problems there. But at the very least, there are issues that are not the result of political of policy decisions, but actually the result of events on the ground, and those the military police are capable of investigating, and of course the MAG is capable of prosecuting. The fact that there is virtually no prosecution, and even though there are investigations, is one of the demonstrations of the lack of law enforcement, and the fact that the system at the moment has failed in providing any kind of accountability.
All right. Well, Sarit Michaeli, spokesperson for B'Tselem, thank you very much for joining us there this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye. And we're now joined on the line by Professor Gerald Steinberg, who's the president of NGO Monitor. Good evening to you, Gerald.
Good evening.
B'Tselem has rejected a request made by the Army's legal department now about purported evidence to support human rights violations allegations during Operation Protective Edge now. It means, and the Army has said it repeatedly, that they value the evidence collected by B'Tselem. And my question to you is the fact that B'Tselem has decided to sever its ties with the army, limited as they may be, is a good thing or a bad thing?
At some point, I'd like to talk a little bit about Sarit Michaeli's claims over the last few minutes, because they all need to be examined carefully, because she's a spokesperson for a political organization. It invokes the language of international law and human rights and investigation, but in fact, the activities of her organization, B'Tselem, are very far from that language. In terms of, and I think that helps me answer your first question.
Mm-hmm.
A good thing or a bad thing, that's a judgment call. But as an academic, I would say that it never made any sense. It was never justified for the Israeli or any other military to have close working relationships with an organization which is political, which has no accountability to the public. It's a private organization getting money from foreign governments and from some American Jews in the Israel Fund for political ideological purposes. They have no methodology. Anybody, and I've looked at it very carefully, if you look at their reports over the last 10 years, their reports are really, they determine the goal, the target, Israel is committing war crimes, and then they collect a lot of testimonies from Palestinians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but be that as it may,
so the army should never have had any kind of professional relationship with them. When I looked at it historically, there was a naivete among this whole issue of human rights violations and international law. The demonization visual, the abuse of this language is something that most military professionals had no experience with. And they thought that if they worked with B'Tselem, which has a halo on their heads as being a human rights group, that somehow this would make the application of these complex laws more acceptable, more readily applied. But in fact, they were completely wrong about this.
Okay, be that as it may, regardless of the political slant that you say is pretty obvious, and the funding and the language they evoke, etc. As long as they bring to the table, I'm going to ask you about the specific thing. As long as they bring to the table testimonies that stand up to scrutiny, why should the army not use them?
Well, I think the key phrase there is that stand up to scrutiny.
Mm-hmm.
There is absolutely no methodology. B'Tselem is notorious. We've looked at it in great detail. And Judge Goldstone said the same thing. B'Tselem was a major part. B'Tselem, Yesh Din, Breaking the Silence, this whole group of organizations in Israel that claim to be human rights monitors. They were a very important element, perhaps the basis for Goldstone's 500-plus page report, which Judge Goldstone himself said does not, in fact, stand up to scrutiny.
Mm-hmm.
Had I known then what I know now, well, what does he know? And what did he know when he wrote the article in 2010? That the testimonies on which that report was based, the NGO-collected testimonies, were, in fact, entirely inconsistent, not at all verifiable, lack credibility. That's what B'Tselem specializes in.
And is that the reason you think that all the inquiries that B'Tselem wants the army to open have amounted to nothing is because the evidence they provide is worthless?
Well, let's look at how the evidence process works in a situation like Gaza. It's incredibly, incredibly complex. Any military unit, any soldier that's fought in that kind of situation knows how difficult it is. For instance, one of the basic claims that the ideologues and the spokespeople like Sarit Michaeli and others, and Chagai Elad, who's become the head of B'Tselem when they all change places within these organizations, one of the principal claims that they make is they can tell what happens in an area from which they are kilometers away from, by interviewing people on the telephone or by sending Palestinians to interview Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
And that process, given the complexity of unraveling what happens in a combat situation when you're in the alleys and the streets and among the mosques and the schools and the houses and the booby-trapped areas, massive booby-trapping, how is any outsider going to be able to tell what happened, particularly in an instant way? They don't have the capability, they don't have the military expertise, neither does Human Rights Watch, neither does Amnesty. It is a facade. I think it's very important to...
Do you think the Israeli army is really capable of scrutinizing and investigating? I'm sure that in every war there are big uncertainties, big often mistakes being made, and the fact that very few cases have been followed through, raises a few questions.
Well, I think there's a I think that's really unfair to the people who are active in the legal wing of the military, the various lawyers and investigators that work very hard to try to determine whether there was a violation of law. And let me give you a very specific example.
Please.
If the Israeli army, a unit from Givati, Golani, Nahal, one of the groups, is in Gaza, and they're getting fired on, and some of their soldiers are being killed or wounded, and it's coming from an area near an UNRWA school. What do? Do you wait, and then you try to determine how many civilians are in that school, and where the firing is, whether it's inside or outside the school, or do you try to protect your people? And that's a very, very difficult judgment call.
Yeah.
To be a violation of international, the language that Sarit Michaeli and the other people use, of international violations of international law, you have to demonstrate intentionality. How do you know when you're a political actor, you're a political activist, how do you know what's in the minds and what information or what intelligence a local commander sitting in that battlefield has? That's extremely difficult.
Yeah.
So first of all, there's really nobody who, on the first instance, who can do this properly except the military. Now, the military does need to have a series of layers in order to make sure that they're accurate. Militaries do try to protect themselves, the United States and Afghanistan, the British, everybody, and of course the Israelis as well.
Yeah.
So therefore you have to have layers. But B'Tselem and the other organizations have done is they politicized this process.
Right.
So yes, the Turkel Commission has made very important recommendations. Israel is certainly as good as doing this as the United States or Canada or any other Western democracy.
So we'll have to leave it there. So thank you very much for joining us, and
okay.
Thank you. Goodbye.